Okay, so thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to talk about yourself and a context leap. So yeah, I mean, do you want to maybe just kick off and give it a bit of an introduction to yourself and how you got here?
Yeah. My name is Melissa Hui. I am the founder of Context Leap, which is a people and culture consultancy here in San Francisco. So my background is I've been in the tech sector for over 14 or 15 years now. I've worked with a lot of the big companies like Google, Microsoft, but I also had the opportunity of working with some really great startups, a lot of the VC-backed startups here. My career has been largely in software and consulting. I have a design I have a social science and anthropology background, but spent a lot of my years as a practicing designer. So now I'm looking at how do we bring design to organizations? How do we bring design to the concept of leadership and improving it? And the work that we do at Context Leap is we sort of focus in three areas. First one is obviously innovation and design. How do we teach companies and leaders to embrace a lot of the creative mindsets that come with bringing design into the organization? The second one's employee experience. So we think about the end-to-end journey of everyone who steps through your company's experience or through the walls that you have in your buildings and your offices. And then the last part is very near and dear to my heart, which is focused on people development. So we do everything from leadership coaching and advisory all the way down to helping enable teams from a purely like a learning experience. So how do we become the best versions of ourselves that we can be?
It's interesting that you say that you come from a design background, you know, and we actually have seen quite a big movement from people in the design and even engineering firm focusing on culture. Why do you think that is? I mean, how do you think it was done in the past, and why do you think it wasn't working?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, Gary. For me, I think that business has changed tremendously in the past 20 years, even in the past 10 years. We've seen the introduction of a lot of technologies, the concept of like agile ways of working, and even sort of like the onset of transforming businesses from a digital perspective. So we've seen the introduction of a lot of digitally native talent who wants to work differently, who think differently about the products, services, and offerings that they deliver to customers. And so with that, there's this very fundamental shift of the ways that they work, the things that they produce are not fundamentally aligned with the company and how it operates. And so now there's this huge shift of like, okay, something's a little asymmetrical here. How do we bring it back into alignment? And so that's why we're seeing an opportunity as designers to apply this very creative, very empathetic, but also very agile way of thinking to help companies move forward into the 21st century.
It's almost like companies are building organizations in the same way that they were building the products.
Yes.
Taking a design approach, taking an agile approach, and because it's worked so well with developing things that are like developing in the future of work, it almost makes sense to develop people in that way, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, when it comes to culture, right? Who do you think should be taking responsibility of that in the company?
That's a really good question. I think to be successful, it has to come from the top. There needs to be that leadership or that executive support for this, meaning not just, oh, we're going to do culture, but we're actually going to put resources to it and actually invest in culture and leadership. So it certainly comes from the top, but I think there's also, when you move more towards like middle management or senior management, I think there's a huge responsibility in the middle too, for shifting the narrative around that, because these are the individuals who are taking all these sort of nebulous concepts like strategic initiatives or big picture visionary thinking and distilling it into the actual tangible day-to-day experience of, hey, I work at company Z. And so they really set the cadence for that. And I think that layer of leadership really needs to think about not just competency as a leader, like, oh, I'm great at marketing, I'm great at, sales, IT, but like being really competent in terms of fostering the right culture and the right mindsets. So I think it starts there, but it can also be bottom up.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I mean, there's a challenge where you've obviously, it's got to be driven from the top down, but at the same time, it's got to be brought in from the bottom up. And I mean, in terms of roles, I mean, besides obviously the leadership, who do you think should be like, who's a good delegation, to on the second tier to manage it? Do you think it should be on the ops side or the HR side or the marketing side?
I think
I'll tell you why we asked that question. Obviously, a big challenge for us at High Five is that a lot of companies want to engage and start using the tool. But then the challenge is that what we find is that this gets led from the top, from the exec level, because they see it as a way to measure culture. But then what happens is it very quickly gets given to HR or administration. And to be honest and quite transparent, it usually fails there. And the question we ask ourselves is, how do you take this forward and drive it? How do you take this people data and this culture data? And who should be responsible for using it on a day-to-day?
In my world, what I see is, I think traditionally, or at least in the past few years, that initiative has been given to HR.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of the logical home. It's, individuals responsible for that. But what I'm seeing as being perhaps a more successful approach is HR as an internal consultancy or advisory, or they play sort of this like informal role of like advising a lot of different business units.
Yeah.
And then being the sort of layer of consistency across all of those areas. So I do think it does sort of reach a point where they have to break down the silos of everyone sort of one-to-one to HR and going like to them, and instead having this sort of continuous conversation across all the different business groups. So I think it is, yes, HR can own it, but I think there's a very strong component of, okay, how do we operationalize what HR knows and the relationship that HR has to different parts of the business? And I think that's where we have to start seeing some of these more ops-focused individuals who are actually thinking about programs and scaling and how do we do all of this.
Yeah. And in your view, do you see that culture drives performance, or performance drives culture? Or maybe even a better question is, what do you think is more important, culture or performance?
I think culture is more important, and I don't think I'm biased in that. And I'll say why. I think performance as a concept is very limited and very narrow. It's defined by numbers, and it doesn't look at sort of like the network effect of who we are, why we do what we do. Culture sets the cadence for everything. It is like the pacer car for everything in the company.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think culture is more important. Performance follows when you have great culture, and I think it has a maximizer effect. Great culture has a maximizing effect on great performance. It's not vice versa.
Oh, I can almost see a visual right now. It's if this thing greater than, but and in terms of I've just got a few more questions here. Where do you think companies go wrong with retaining culture?
There's a lot of different areas.
When it comes to scaling,
Yeah, I think in terms of scaling, it's companies get prescriptive about culture. They say like, we are this and we are that. So it's very aspirational. They sort of pick the adjectives that they love. They pick the values and the words that they think are really cool. But they don't actually look to embody that in any way, or they don't actually look at where they already have been successful. So they don't look at their cultural assets. Like, what are we great at? What are we already being very effective at? And what do people actually love about working here? There's really not that sort of two-way dialogue. It's a very like peer down and be like, oh, I think we're like this, or I think we like these things. So I think that's one. They're too prescriptive. I think another piece is that they don't have a framework for continuous conversation or feedback from their employees. Again, sort of that prescriptive or top down. But I think what they can do is start to put in programs or tools or processes that actually facilitate really great conversations with their talent. So it's a little bit like having a constant pulse on the organization. What's the vibe? What's the energy? So I think that's the other part that they're really missing out on, is they don't actually have an engine for this. They don't have a mechanism for this.
So see what you mean, that they need the ongoing data and feedback, but at the same time, they need to be transparent and open enough to change, I guess, and not being so fixated on what they think is the culture.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. That's really, really insightful. And then, like, yeah, I mean, just to finish off, just a final few questions. I mean, how do you spend your day on average? I mean, you're now in I guess it's a new venture. I guess you guys are a remote team, is that right?
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, how do you spend your day on average and just stay productive, I guess, with being remote?
There's a lot of very interesting things that I've picked up for myself personally that I've shared with people I work with. And a lot of that is, one, the philosophy of just like when you're in an environment that inspires you or that you're comfortable, you are naturally going to be in the most relaxed state of mind. So therefore you're going to produce significantly better work. Yeah. So that's just one, the mindset is there. For me, staying focused and staying productive in this work is having clarity. And there's a lot of different like macro views of how to get clarity. So I actually use design methods to help me figure out where I need to go and how to solve problems I need to solve. Yeah. But then there's the
there's say it again, divine methods.
Yeah, so design methods.
Oh, design.
So I actually apply design to some of my business problems and actually work through the methods. But then there's also divine methods, because sometimes as your founder, you really have to just like pray and make it through the next month. And then there's like more micro things. So I recently came across a concept of using design sprints in my workday. So it's a little bit like the Pomodoro method, but someone had introduced me to ultra working. And that helps me get clarity in terms of you design your day in cycles, and you get very clear about your energy level, your morale, your focus, and then you just run through the cycles. And I was like,
is that based on the Jake Knapp book, the Make Time?
It may be. There's like a lot of different points of origin for it.
Brilliant, I read it last year, and I've managed to stick to it for the last year, but I do need a refresher. But it's all about reflecting and seeing what works and what drops and picks up your energy levels, and make the most of that.
Yeah.
So that's really. And on that note, I mean, is there anything you're reading or listening to that's inspiring you lately?
I think a lot of individuals in this space will agree that Brené Brown is fantastic.
Yeah.
I really like things by Adam Grant as well. He does a lot of the really great work in organizational. There was a very short-lived podcast by the New York Times. I think they had like 6 episodes called Change Agent. And they talk about people who've solved really challenging things in one area and how they've applied techniques or methods to other areas or industries that are completely different. So I think those 3 are sort of my base psychological diet, if you will. And
any tools and software you're using just to keep yourself productive?
Yeah, I really love. I love Trello. It's very simple. I use just a good old notebook and a pen a lot. And then I recently came across a tool called Monday.com.
Yeah.
A lot of teams use that. Yeah. So I use it for personal and professional project planning because it's so visual. And I actually use it to just sort of do time tracking on myself, because they have a lot of really great features built in.
Yeah, it's really good. We actually plan our sprints around that as well. Just helps us. No, we don't. Just to help forecast, we do monthly sprints at 3 weeks, and then it helps us just divvy up the time, just to make sure we're not over or underscoping. It kind of helps us to stay agile enough as well, so we can drag things around.
Yeah.
So, man, it was really amazing spending time with you today, all day from San Francisco. So yeah, thanks a lot for your time, and give us a high five. Yeah, cheers.
Yeah. Scary.